I hope you're ready for some controversial opinions because it's going to get juicy. So I am going to share my very honest and unfiltered opinions about the worst books I have read in 2024 in this video. But first of all, I want to say, no matter what I say in this video about your favorite books, I don't judge anyone for their book tastes. If you really loved a book that I absolutely disliked, I am still so incredibly happy for you that it's one of your favorite books or that you extremely enjoyed this book. I really don't care. These are all just my personal opinions and how I experience those books, because reading is so extremely subjective and we all experience the world in such a different way that we also experience books in an extremely different way, because in the end it's just words on paper and we all feel very differently about those words, and that's the excitement that the book community brings, in my opinion. So this is a safe space for all book lovers, so let's keep it respectful and honest. So if you did love any of these books that I'm going to talk about, please let me know in the comments what you did enjoy about them, because I would really like to know, and I would love to have a very open discussion about books, because that's what we're here for in the end. So let's start off with Late Bloomer. I was very excited for this book because I've read Tilly in Technicolor by Maisie Eddings and I really loved that book. It was also one of my top books I've read in 2024. If you want to see that video, I'm also going to link it at the end of this video so you can see the books that I actually liked. And it did start off pretty great. The first third of the book, I would say, was super cute. It was really discussing neurodiversity. It had these very diverse characters and I really enjoyed it. I really liked the setup of this book. But then at one point the spice started. And I'm not really sure what Maisie Eddings thought she was doing with this. It felt like the spice was taking over this book. I really don't know what was going on here, because from that point on it felt like the characters didn't really have any depth anymore. They completely lost their charm, they completely lost their quirkiness. It felt so bland at that point, and also I just didn't really care anymore because the spice was just taking over so much. And it completely ruined their relationship for me. And I was like, I saw so much potential in this book. And I was so utterly disappointed because I also filmed a reel / TikTok / short for this book when I was still at the beginning of this book, because I thought this is going to be such a great book for neurodivergent people. Also, the story was very boring from that point on. Like, it all felt very predictable. It just failed me, to be honest. And I feel like it was this disappointing, which is why it's made it on this list, because I was so excited about it in the first place. So this was an absolute fail for me, and I'm super sad because I thought Maisie Eddings could be one of my new favorite authors, because she's writing so many characters with neurodiversity and she's talking so openly about neurodiversity. And since I'm neurodivergent, I thought like I would absolutely love this, but apparently not. Okay, and now I got a book that is very well loved amongst the book community. That is like such a TikTok hype book. Everyone is raving about this book and it's like this cute cowboy romance and everyone is going to love this book, and I was so excited to dive into this. And the book that I'm talking about is Flawless by Elsie Silva. The beginning of it was super cute and I was like, oh, I'm settling in for a cute cowboy romance. I'm like, this is going to be such a vibe because of the nature vibes and we're going into the countryside. The characters and the storyline also was pretty promising and I was like, this has so much potential, and especially because it's a series. I think it's about the different brothers. I was like really excited about the series because I was like, I can like read this whole series and they're all connected to each other. About 1/3 into the book, I would say, there was also, pretty similarly to Late Bloomer, the spice problem. And the thing with spice is not that I dislike spice. I'm generally not someone who's like super into spice, but I do like spice from time to time, and I did expect spice with this book. Unlike with Late Bloomer, I didn't really expect spice, to be honest. But with Flawless, I knew there was going to be spice, but the kind of spice there was, it felt like it was written for men. There was nothing sensual about it, there was nothing romantic about it, it wasn't a great spice, it was super cringe. The words they were saying to each other were so cringe. If you enjoy this kind of spice, like you do you, like I said. But my dislike for this book didn't end there. It didn't end with the spice. It wasn't like just, okay, I didn't like the spice, okay, moving on. Also, the spice was basically most of this book and it kind of ruined it for me. But besides that, I also deeply dislike the use of bull riding in this book because the main character is a bull rider. At first, when I first heard that he's a bull rider, I thought he's like riding these like mechanical bulls. I wasn't aware that they were talking about like real bull riding, like with real bulls. I mean, I could have guessed, but at first it just didn't come to mind. There wasn't one line about how this is animal abuse and how the bulls aren't enjoying their time. I mean, these men are chasing the bulls and it's explained in very rich detail how they're grabbing the bulls by the horns and are jumping on the bulls. The bulls are super angry and are running around and you have to stay on top of that bull. And like, I mean, it's obvious that the bulls are not liking that, but I feel like it could have been mentioned in some kind of way and it could have been also critiqued in some kind of way, but it wasn't at all. And I was pretty disappointed by that. And also the romance just completely lost its grip on me since the spice scenes. I feel like with some books I can like ignore that there are spice scenes that I don't enjoy, but with this one it was taking over so much that the whole romance just fell completely flat to me. So next we're going to talk about the book that I absolutely hated the most in 2024. It's not the last book that we're going to talk about, but it's the one that I hated the most. I probably hated this book the most of all the books that I've ever read. I think it's the worst book that I've ever read because it was simply disgusting. And if you like this book, like I said, please don't come at me because I fully support you. I know that I experienced this in a very subjective way and that I am feeling very particularly about this, but if you didn't experience it that way, that's like completely fine. This book almost made me throw up. And the book that I'm talking about is no other than Verity by Colleen Hoover. So first of all, let's start off with the characters. The characters were so bland. They were so bland and they didn't have any personality whatsoever. They were the most boring characters I ever could have experienced, except for what their part in the story was, but besides that, they didn't have any personality at all. And the thing is, I knew going into this book that Colleen Hoover likes to use certain plot points for shock value. And I also knew that Verity was supposed to be the book that was the most shocking out of all of her books. So I was going into this with a pretty open mind, but the way she did it with this one was absolutely beyond me. I don't understand how you can come up with this stuff, and also I don't understand how you can think it's okay to write this. So this is not really a critique towards like people reading this book, but it's more a critique towards like Colleen Hoover, like how could you write this book? I just don't understand. And this rant might contain some mild spoilers, so if you don't want to be spoiled for this book, like maybe skip ahead to the next book. But I can't talk about this book without some spoilers because it's just not possible to explain what triggered me so much with this book without like talking about what has happened in the book. Okay. So, the main character in this book is reading a manuscript from Verity. Verity is another character in this book, and Verity explains in that manuscript how she is abusing her child in a very extreme and over-the-top and super gruesome way. And she's not just abusing her child, she's abusing her baby. She can't connect with her baby, so she's abusing it basically since the baby is born. She has these two daughters, and the one daughter is so different and so weird in her mind, and she can't connect with the child that she has to abuse the child. And the abuse is explained in like extreme rich detail. We get to hear every single thing about the abuse, every single detail. And no, to Colleen Hoover, this wasn't shocking enough. This wasn't shocking enough. This wasn't explanation enough that Verity is probably out of her mind. There has to be an explanation why she's abusing the child. And the explanation from that mother was that the child shows emotions differently, that the child expresses itself differently, that the child doesn't cry or laugh as much as the other one. And we get to know all of these details throughout the book. And then at one point, the mother tells the father, the teacher of that child said that the child is probably autistic. And I'm like, excuse me? I mean, I have already made my guesses throughout the book, but when she said this in such a disgusted way, you could really feel the way she said it and her actions afterwards, that this kind of reason made her justify her actions and made her abuse her child even more. And what is so disgusting to me about using autism as the explanation for why she's abusing this child and making her be able to justify it because of that is that there was no explanation about autism and what it actually is, no educational purpose, not saying like this is wrong. I mean, of course you know that this is wrong while reading this, but the thing is, Colleen needed a reason for that insane abuse. So she used the first thing that came to her mind without actually thinking about the consequences, because spreading these kind of stereotypes, making it feel okay that you feel differently about autistic people and that you don't like them, this is pure ableism. I don't understand how it can be okay to write something like this, because she didn't consider at all like what kind of impact this might have on the world, what kind of impact this might have on other autistic people, and what kind of impact this might have on how people see autistic people in the future. Because you could take something from this and you could be like, okay, autistic people are different and I'm allowed to feel differently about them. Maybe I'm not allowed to abuse them. I feel like that's the logic thing you're going to think in the end. But maybe you still think it's alright if I don't like autistic people and if I treat them differently. Even if you don't feel like educating people in your books, then just don't use things that need education, that need to have some kind of explanation and reflection around the topic, and just don't use that topic. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm so mad about this, because I'm thinking, just imagine being an autistic person that experienced less love from their parents because they're autistic, that experienced less love from their surroundings because they're autistic, and that maybe even experienced abuse because they're autistic. And you're starting this book because you think, I liked Colleen Hoover's books before, so I'm going to like this one as well. Or this is a very hyped book, so I'm going to see what this one is about. And you go into this book without any trigger warnings in the beginning. Like, it has no trigger warnings, it has nothing. So you go into this book and you think like, okay, this is going to be a very interesting thriller kind of read that is going to leave me breathless, hopefully. And it's so triggering and traumatizing for autistic people to read this. And it was even traumatizing and triggering to me, even though I never experienced any kind of abuse. I never experienced any kind of like less love from my parents just because I'm a bit different and I'm autistic. No, I didn't experience any of that, but it was still extremely triggering and traumatizing for me. I just can't imagine how someone might feel who actually experienced those things. My heart is breaking, honestly, just thinking about that. So yeah, that was that. That was Verity. And if you still want to read this book, like you do you, maybe keep in mind all of those things I said. If you still love this book, that's completely fine as well. I know that you probably didn't notice that or didn't register that, and that's completely fine. Like I said, like, please don't take this the wrong way, but that was just my personal experience of this book. I feel so intensely just talking about it. And then last but definitely not least, at least on this list, Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I went into this book with a huge excitement for it because I have seen the hype of this book everywhere. It was all over the internet, all over the book community. Everyone was raving about this book, how great it was, how magical it was, the dragons in here, and so on, the romance, all of it. And I was like, this has to be great. And I actually bought the first two books straight away. Like, I bought this one and I bought the second one as well within the same order because I was so sure sure that I wanted to binge the first 2 books that are out already, but well, I haven't read the second book yet. I'm probably going to sell the second book because I don't see myself picking it up anytime soon. This was another book where I really felt like it was only written for the shock value. It was only written to make people gasp and throw the book away, to trigger some very extreme reactions on social media. Like, that's what it felt like reading this book, because from the very beginning we get to see people dying left and right and left and right, and I was like, what is happening here? Because the character deaths in this book felt so unimportant to me. I was like so unimpressed by it. I was like, what do you want? Like, what kind of reaction are you expecting? Like, I have heard this character's name only one time and then suddenly he's dead and I'm supposed to be like, oh my gosh? Because I wasn't. I was like, this is very boring. Like, this is getting very boring because there wasn't any shock value to it, even though it was written for the shock value. Because the more deaths happened, the less I've cared about the death. I was like, okay, more people dying, okay, go on, whatever. Because in my opinion, a good character death has to be built up. You have to get to know the character and you have to build some kind of connection to the character. And then at some point the character dies and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine the story without the character. And that's how it's supposed to feel like. And there was one character death where I was like, okay, this is really sad. And it was towards the end and I was excited that it at least had one character death that I cared about. But I was also very sad about that one because I didn't care for any of these characters except for the one who died. It was the only character that had some kind of interesting characteristics and some kind of interesting personality, because the other characters felt very bland and very stereotypical to me. It felt like the main male love interest was this like typical bad boy and that doesn't let anyone tell him what he's supposed to do. And then there's this super small main girl. She's this new girl and everyone hates her because of her mother. And I was like, I wonder what's going to happen between these two. I'm not sure. This is going to be such a surprise. It took all of those stereotypes and it put it into one book. Like, that's what it felt like reading this book. I have to give credit to the author because there is one thing that I did really like about this book, and that was that the main character was disabled and that we heard a lot about her disability. I mean, in my opinion, it could have been even more detailed, just because I particularly enjoy characters that show their weaknesses, that show their disabilities, that talk about them openly. That was actually the thing that I enjoyed the most about this book. But that wasn't all. Like, that wasn't all that I'm going to talk about, because we're also going to talk about the world building in here. Because I started this book and I couldn't imagine anything. I couldn't imagine a single thing that was happening in this book. I mean, I could kind of take these few descriptive words that were used here and there to build my own kind of world in my head. It just felt very sporadic to me. If you transport into another world, you want to know exactly how that world is looking. Maybe not as extreme as like in Lord of the Rings, but a bit more than it was in here. And of course, another thing that I really disliked about this book, the way the spice was integrated, because we didn't get any spice for basically the 2/3 of the book. I really felt like the spice was taking over once again, and I really don't understand how authors are doing this again and again. Like, maybe this is just like something I personally dislike. Just let me know in the comments what you think about it. But I just don't understand why characters have to start making love and then it's the only thing they're doing. I was so excited for this book, like I said. I saw so much potential in it, and I also really liked the concept of dragons in a book, in a fantasy book, because I really love me some dragons, but that the dragons were talking to the characters in their heads also really messed it up for me. Because I do have to say, that's definitely a personal thing, but I hate talking animals and talking mystical beasts and all of that. I would just rather for them to communicate in the way that they're communicating and not in this human kind of way. It just doesn't suit the animal characters or the dragon characters, whatever. It just doesn't suit them and it just felt completely off to me. So yeah, those were all of the books that I deeply disliked in 2024. I hope we can agree that we all have different opinions, and I hope that we can discuss it down below in a very respectful way. Be kind to each other, support each other. With that, I would say thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!